Are you really going to do this, Dad? My daughter's voice came over the phone, sharp as a shard of ice. Are you going to destroy everything just for money? I looked down at the cup of coffee gone cold on the kitchen table. Outside the window, the morning sun was rising, tinting the backyard a pale orange. A perfectly peaceful morning for an execution. It's not about the money, sweetheart, I said, my voice unnervingly steady. It never was about the money. It's about what my money has paid for. There was a long pause. I could hear her stifled sob. Kevin is my husband. He's our family. No, I said, and the word hung between us, cold and final. He's a bad investment, Sarah. It's time I cut my losses. I hung up before she could answer. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you? And where are you listening? The hiss of beef charring over coals is a sacred smell. To me, it carries the scent of summer weekends, of baseball on the radio, and above all, of Carolyn. This was her ritual, the Memorial Day cookout. She used to say the best way to remember the dead wasn't with tears in a dark room, but with laughter in a sunlit yard, among the family and friends still here to share the stories. So 5 years after she was gone, I kept the ritual. I flipped a ribeye, and the seared fat sent up a fragrant ribbon of smoke. My backyard looked immaculate, a living postcard of suburban America. The lawn was clipped neat, and the rose bushes Carolyn loved were exploding with color. My neighbor, Bill Peterson, stood by a cooler with a Budweiser, arguing the Phillies' playoff odds. His wife, Mary, was giggling with a couple of Sarah's friends. Everything in its place, a perfect wall. But I've lived long enough to know the most dangerous cracks are the ones you can't see right away. Then Kevin arrived late, as usual. The snarl of a German engine cut through the easy chatter. A glossy midnight blue Porsche slid into my driveway and stopped beside my beat-up Ford F-150. Across the grass, Bill let out a low whistle. Bill worked night shifts at the steel mill for 40 years. I wondered if he knew that car's sport suspension had been paid for by someone else's retirement. Mine? Kevin climbed out like a star stepping onto a red carpet. Hair perfectly set, smile blinding, polo shirt worth a week of my groceries. He hoisted a bottle of wine like a trophy. Sorry folks, traffic was brutal, he boomed. But I brought a fantastic Cabernet to make up for it. His laugh was a shade too loud, a shade too bright, the sound of a man papering over a deep crack in the foundation. Sarah, my daughter, hurried out to greet him. She hugged her husband, quick and weightless. It smelled of expensive cologne and something like guilt. Or maybe I was imagining it. Dad, look what Kevin brought, Sarah said, pulling me from the grill. I glanced at the label. I knew the type sold at the downtown boutique where bottles sit on pedestals like art. Very nice, Kevin, I said. But a few Miller Lights would have done the trick. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Oh no, Dad, special occasions call for something special, and that, ver is oper. He launched into a little demonstration on opening and letting the wine breathe, lecturing the small crowd that gathered about why patience matters. Just like a good investment, he concluded, smug. He never asked about my investments. Maybe because he burned through most of them. I turned back to the grill and felt Mrs. Gable's gaze from next door. A narrow gap had opened between her curtains. She was always there. The neighborhood's silent audience. I wondered what story she was telling herself, happy family cookout, or a carefully rehearsed impression of one. The party rolled on. Kevin held court, spinning inflated tales about a deal he was about to close, an app he was developing, buzzwords fluttering from his mouth like bright, empty butterflies. Disruptive, synergy, game changer. I brought the steaks to the table where everyone had gathered. Sarah had made Carolyn's potato salad. For a moment, as I set down the platter, a small peace settled over me. This was what Carolyn wanted. And then Sarah did it. Maybe she was just feeling a lull in the conversation. Maybe she thought she was helping her husband. Or worse, maybe she truly believed it. One of her friends asked Kevin how he was funding all his projects. Before he could answer, Sarah laughed lightly and said, "My dad? He's the best angel investor there is. Just ask Kevin." I see. A strange, almost tangible silence fell over the yard. The crickets suddenly seemed loud. Bill, a forkful of potato halfway to his mouth, froze. Mary bent to fuss with an invisible stain on her dress. Everyone had heard the crack. My daughter had traced it in public across the Caldwell family's perfect wall. In a split second, I wasn't Jack Caldwell, the father, the host. I was a function, a funding source, an ATM that grills. Kevin broke the silence. He laughed too heartily and threw an arm around my shoulders. He sure is my biggest supporter, he said, giving my back a friendly thump. But I saw his eyes, a flicker of triumph. He'd won. The performance had landed. I said nothing. I nodded and chewed my steak. It tasted like ash. When night came and the last guest drifted off, I started cleaning up alone. Sarah and Kevin had left an hour earlier. They had an early brunch. I welcomed the quiet. It gave me room to think. The fire in the grill had died down to a bed of dull, pulsing coals. I stared into them, wondering how quickly the flame that had once warmed my family could turn and burn it all away. As I gathered the last paper plates, I saw it. A small glossy receipt, wind blown into the corner by Carolyn's roses. I picked it up. It was from a high-end jewelry store downtown, the one Carolyn used to pass and only dared to admire from the sidewalk. A diamond necklace. The price made me squint to be sure. The purchase date was last Tuesday. Sarah's birthday is 6 months from now. I folded the slip with careful, knife-sharp creases. The coated paper felt cold against my fingertips. I slid it into my jeans pocket. The play had its first prop, and I knew, with a cold certainty, that I would have to write the final act. I didn't sleep that night. The jewelry receipt lay on my nightstand, bone white in the thin moonlight. It looked like a small white flag, not of surrender, but of a new Cold War just declared. I should have been angry, should have felt betrayed, but the dominant feeling was a painful clarity, the kind the doctor feels when he finally puts a name to a long-simmering illness. The next morning, I didn't confront anyone. Confrontations require emotion, and emotion is a luxury I can't afford anymore. Instead, I did what I'd done for 40 years at PwC. I went looking for truth in the numbers. I walked into my home office, a sanctuary of order and logic. The smell of old paper and polished oak always steadied me. I didn't turn on the computer, not yet. First, I needed to face the physical evidence, the mistakes written in ink. I pulled open the bottom drawer and took out an old leather-bound ledger, the one I stopped writing in after Carolyn died. I opened it. My handwriting was still as crisp and decisive as ever. I flipped to the page titled Family Investments Divided by Loans. I smoothed the paper and began my silent audit. Case 1. ConnectSphere Incorporated. 2018. Investment. $15,000. I remember the day. Kevin showed up with a slick PowerPoint and a blazing enthusiasm. He talked about seed money. This isn't just an app, Dad, he said, eyes shining. It's going to change how people connect. I looked at Sarah. She nodded eagerly, her face full of faith in her husband, and I signed the check. Result, ConnectSphere never appeared on the App Store. The website lived 6 months and vanished. When I asked, Kevin sighed and blamed unforeseen issues with the developer. 2 months later, they had a $5,000 patio set. Case 2, Apex Marketing, 2020. Loan, $20,000. This time, the term was bridge loan. Just a cash flow issue, Dad, Kevin said over the phone, urgent and breathless. I've got a big contract with a beverage company, but they pay quarterly. I just need a bridge to cover payroll. I hesitated until Sarah called afterward, worried. Kevin's so stressed, Dad. He's working so hard. I wired the money the next morning. Result? The loan was never mentioned again. I turned to my ledger. Loan to Apex Marketing, $20,000. I can still hear Kevin. You saved us, Dad. 3 months later, Sarah posted photos from their 10-day vacation in Hawaii. I hadn't taken a vacation in 10 years. Case trace. Oak Haven real estate project. 2022. Investment, $50. The big one. Kevin talked about house flipping. He'd found an old place in an up-and-coming neighborhood. Buy low, sell high, he said with easy confidence. A sure thing, Dad. An investment in Sarah's future. That line hit my soft spot. I pulled from my retirement. Result, the house sold 6 months later, broke even. Kevin said, market cooled unexpectedly. No repayment. and a midnight blue Porsche appeared in my driveway this Memorial Day, I put down the pen. The room was absolutely still, and then I saw it. The ergo moment. The problem wasn't project failure. The problem was the pattern. Each failure came with a plausible story, and each failure was followed by a new luxury purchase. I wasn't funding a business. I was underwriting his lifestyle. I wasn't an angel investor. I was a fool. I leaned back, feeling the weight of years of self-deception settling on my shoulders. How does a smart man get taken again and again? The answer was simple, and it hurt. Each time, the reason was Sarah. I wasn't investing in him. I was trying to buy my daughter's happiness, a deal I knew deep down was doomed from the start. I heard Carolyn's voice in my head, clear as if she were sitting in the chair across from me. She never trusted Kevin. She was gracious, charming, but she saw the cracks behind his smile. One evening years ago, after Kevin and Sarah had just left, she turned to me and said something I've never forgotten. "Be careful of men who sell the future, Jack," she said gently. "They're usually selling yours." I didn't listen. I chose to believe the performance. I sat up straight. The remorse ebbed, replaced by a cold acceptance. I wouldn't flog myself anymore. The mistakes were made. The entries were written. Now it was time to tally the damage and plan the next move. I closed the ledger. The sound was final. The past sealed. I looked at the dark computer on my desk. I had audited the past. Now it was time to investigate the present. The jewelry receipt wasn't just a clue. It was an invitation into Kevin Riley's digital world. And I am an auditor about to have a very busy day. The next Sunday, I went to Sarah and Kevin's around 3 in the afternoon. I brought a homemade apple pie, still warm, wrapped in a checkered kitchen towel. It was Carolyn's recipe, one Sarah loves. The crust was shattered crisp, the filling perfectly sweet tart. It was a perfect weapon, a symbol of family love, of normalcy, of a harmless father and grandfather. "Dad," Sarah cried when she opened the door, her face lighting up at the sight of the pie. "You didn't have to do that." She said it, but this time she didn't glance at her phone. She looked me in the eye, and for a moment I saw my little girl again, just a flicker before the fog pulled her back. Kevin stepped out from the living room with a glass of scotch. "Great to see you, Dad Jack," he said, smile at the ready. "That pie smells fantastic." I was on enemy ground. I had to be careful. I played the doddering old man to perfection. I asked about the garden. I griped about my back. I was part of the furniture, harmless, familiar. No one is cautious around furniture. While Sarah cut the pie in the kitchen, I asked, "Where's the bathroom again?" I keep forgetting. That was a lie. I knew exactly where it was, but it gave me an excuse to drift past Kevin's home office, the room he loved to call his command center. The door was ajar. I slowed, pretending to search my bearings. I had only seconds, but an auditor's brain can harvest a lot in seconds. I didn't touch a thing. I only looked. A stack of unopened mail on the desk, most of it in windowed envelopes, bills, a whiteboard crowded with diagrams and arrows that looked impressive until you actually read them. Buzzwords like vertical growth and leverage the digital platform. It was the homework of a boy trying to impress a teacher with words he didn't really understand. And on the corner of the desk, a stack of fresh business cards. I couldn't read the name, but I caught the logo, a stylized globe, generic and cheap. I continued to the bathroom and completed my performance. When I returned, the pie was plated. We sat in the living room, a space dressed in sleek, expensive pieces that felt more like a showroom than a home. I waited for my moment. I knew I'd get only one. A frontal assault would put him on guard. I needed a flanking move. I opened with something casual. "I read a piece in the Wall Street Journal yesterday," I said, sipping coffee, "about a guy in Silicon Valley who sold his startup for billions. Incredible." And Kevin nodded, like a man who lunches with billionaires. "That's the market now, Dad. It's all about vision." That's when I set the hook. I turned to him with a warm, admiring tone I'd perfected after years of dealing with puffed-up executives. "I have to say, I'm impressed with how you're pulling everything together, Kevin. That big project you mentioned at the cookout, it sounds promising." I paused, then dropped the question that mattered. "You must have a sharp mentor or partner. People like that aren't easy to find." A man's ego is a door that's never locked. I slid in the key and gave it a gentle turn. He bit instantly. Kevin's face brightened. He set down his glass and leaned in, as if sharing state secrets. "You're right," he said, chest swelling. "I can't say too much NDAs. You know how it is." He lowered his voice theatrically. "But my partner? He's the real deal. Name's Marcus Thorne. He doesn't like the spotlight, no social media, keeps a low profile. But in private equity circles, he's a legend." He said the name Marcus Thorne as if bestowing a favor, as if handing me a bar of gold. To me, it was the sound of a key sliding into a lock and turning. A dry click in my head. "Marcus Thorne," I repeated, nodding slowly, as if trying to place it. "Sounds familiar. Must have read it somewhere." "Of course," Kevin said, reclining, perfectly pleased with himself. "He's a game changer." And we won't refiler. I stayed another half hour, talking weather, the Phillies, anything empty enough to mask the fact that I had what I come for. When I drove home, the apple pie left on their counter was just a souvenir of the trip. I went in with a suspicion. I left with a name. Marcus Thorne. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he looked like. But I knew one thing for sure. He wasn't a legend. He was a ghost. And I was about to turn on the light. The next morning, I wasn't at home. I didn't trust my own internet connection. And more importantly, I didn't trust that Kevin, in whatever brand of desperation he was nursing, hadn't installed some kind of monitoring software on the home network. Paranoia, as they say, is just clarity in a world of con men. I drove 30 miles to the county public library, an old red brick building I'd never set foot in before. I paid cash for a gas card, took a temporary login, and planted myself at the most out-of-the-way computer. This was my safe house. No browsing history, no personal traces, just me and a name. Marcus Thorne. I typed it into Google. Marcus Thorne. The results were almost nothing. A few LinkedIn pages for mid-level managers, an obituary for a dentist who died a decade ago, no investment legend, no press, no portfolio, no charity photos. The absence itself was a fact. In today's business world, if you don't exist on Google, you don't exist unless you're trying very hard not to. I needed to dig deeper. I needed to go where performances end and paper lives on, the public records. I pulled up Delaware's business registry, the offshore of choice for shell corporations. I entered Marcus Thorne in the register agent field. The screen filled up. Thorne Enterprises LLC, Apex Horizon Ventures, Silverline Global. A parade of names that sounded important and meant very little. I clicked through them. They all shared the same tale. Their registered address pointed to a nameless office building in Wilmington, Delaware, the sort of place where, for a modest fee, you can incorporate 100 companies without ever showing up. Their mailing addresses were rows of P.O. boxes at UPS stores sprinkled across the Northeast. Thorne's companies were the digital equivalent of cheap suits, respectable at a distance, threadbare up close. No employees, no real business activity. Just conduits for money. But conduits for what? And for whom? Next step, court records. I turned to Pacer, the federal court system's electronic filing database, and searched Marcus Thorne, filtering for criminal matters. My heart skipped when the results populated. There were more hits than I expected. Wire fraud, securities fraud, extortion. I opened the most recent file, a federal case in the Southern District of New York, 3 years past. Thorne had pleaded guilty to running a small Ponzi scheme, a fake green energy outfit that bilked investors. 2 years in federal prison, released 6 months ago. The investment legend Kevin had name-dropped was, in fact, a recently paroled criminal. A cold trickle ran down my spine. The library air felt suddenly thin. I read on. I found an old local paper account of Thorne's trial describing his modus operandi. He never went front and center. He found intermediaries presentable, ambitious men lacking street sense, used them to woo communities, collect funds, and sign paperwork. When the house of cards collapsed, Thorne vanished with the money, and the intermediaries were left to face angry investors and the law. Then I saw it, an old, grainy photo that accompanied the article. Thorne leaving the courthouse, middle-aged, sharp-featured, and impassive. Walking beside him, whispering in his ear, was a younger man, a potential intermediary. I had seen that face before. I fumbled in my wallet for the faded wedding photo of Sarah's big day. There, among Kevin's groomsmen, was a man with that same smile, the one Kevin had introduced as an old buddy from business school. The final piece clicked into place. Kevin wasn't Thorne's partner. He was the next middleman. He was the patsy. Thorne was using greed, vanity, and Kevin's social currency to run a new scam. And when it inevitably blew up, which it almost certainly would, Kevin would be the one left holding the legal and financial bag while Thorne slid back into the dark. I stared at the screen, the temporary power and control I'd felt confronting Kevin the day before evaporating into a new, suffocating urgency. This was no longer merely a family financial problem. My daughter was married to a man actively entangled with a federal criminal network. She was heartbreakingly in the eye of the storm. I logged off. I printed nothing. I didn't want to walk out with physical evidence from this place. The information was lodged in my head, sharp and terrible. I stepped out of the library into harsh midday Sunday. The world looked the same, but for me, everything had changed. I knew the monster's name. I knew how it worked. I knew time was no longer on my side. I had to move, and I couldn't do it alone. I took out my phone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Sarah. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "David," I said when he picked up. "Jack Caldwell here. I need to see you. Right now. And bring the thickest file you've got." David Sterling's office hadn't changed in 20 years. The same floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, packed with thick, leather-bound law books that looked as if the founding fathers themselves had signed them. The air smelled of old paper, furniture wax, and discretion. I had chosen David for a reason. The Sterling family had been the town's lawyers for 3 generations. His signature on the document carried the weight of history and integrity. I was borrowing his family's honor to protect mine. David, now well into his 60s, hair silvered, tortoiseshell frames perched on his nose, watched me across his broad desk. He didn't interrupt. I didn't tell him about the nights I'd lain awake, or the ashtrays left by a bite of steak. I presented the facts the way an auditor presents a report. My son-in-law, Kevin Riley, has financial ties to a man named Marcus Thorne. I began, steady. Thorne is a convicted felon securities fraud, wire fraud. He's recently been released from prison. I have reason to believe they're planning something similar with my daughter Sarah used as a front. I need to protect my daughter and my assets. Immediately. David listened. Fingers laced together. He showed no shock. He'd heard too many stories about the cracks behind perfect facades. "When was the last time you updated your will, Jack?" he asked. "Not good enough," I cut in. "A will can be challenged. Kevin could manipulate Sarah into contesting it. He'll hire lawyers, claim I lack capacity. He'll burn through her inheritance in legal fees. I don't want a fence, David. I need a fortress." David nodded slowly, a flash of understanding in his eyes. He spoke my language. "An irrevocable trust," he said. "You transfer ownership of the assets to the trust. You can still manage them as trustee if you wish, but legally, they're no longer yours. They'll be beyond creditors, lawsuits, and inconvenient sons-in-law." "Exactly," I said, "and here's what I want." For the next hour, we sketched out the structure. All my major assets, the house Carolyn and I built. The investment portfolio I'd painstakingly grown over 40 years. The remainder of my savings would be conveyed into the Caldwell Family Trust. Sarah would be the sole beneficiary. "And the distribution terms?" David asked, pen hovering over his yellow legal pad. This was a crucial part. This wasn't punitive. It was rescue. "The trust will pay for Sarah's medical expenses and provide a modest monthly stipend for living," I said. "But the principal, the capital, the corpus will be untouchable." "Until when?" David asked. "Until one of 2 events occurs. My death or the termination of Sarah's legal relationship with Kevin Riley." David paused, pen still. He peered at me over his glasses. "Jack, that's a hardline clause. A court might see it as coercing a divorce." I'd anticipated the question. When David wanted the why, I didn't tell him about Marcus Thorne. I told him about the apple pie. "Last weekend, I baked Sarah an apple pie, David," I said, my voice softer. "Carolyn's recipe. It used to be her favorite thing in the world. When I handed it to her, she said, 'Oh, Dad, you didn't have to.' But she said it while her eyes were glued to her phone. She didn't even realize it was the first time I baked that pie since her mother died. I let the silence fill the room. She's been in that fog too long, David. She can't see the things that are real. This trust isn't a prison to keep her out. It's a lighthouse. One day, when she's ready, she'll see the light and find her way back. Until then, I have to make sure the house is still there for her. David was quiet for a long beat. Then he spoke, quietly sympathetic. I understand, Jack. I'll have my associates work through the night. We'll have it ready by the weekend. 2 days later, I was back in his office. A stack of documents, legal slabs that looked like paper tombstones sat on the desk. I read each page, every clause. Then I began to sign. I signed my name over and over. Each signature was another brick laid in the fortress. I signed away ownership of my house. I signed away title to the investments. With every stroke of the pen, the physical burden of assets lifted, replaced by the heavy, invisible weight of security. When I signed the final page and the notary seal snapped down with a dry, decisive click, a strange calm washed over me. I had relinquished everything. In doing so, I had taken back control. I walked out of David's office late that afternoon. The air was cool and clean. The fortress was built. Sarah's future was protected. But I knew it was only the beginning. A fortress can safeguard a legacy, but it can't keep a daughter from the choices she'll make now. The threat of Kevin and Marcus Thorne still hung over us, a dark cloud on the horizon. I had prepared to defend. Now I had to figure out how to go on the offensive. Finishing the legal fortress brought a sense of safety, but it also felt like deadbolting the front door while knowing the thief was already in the neighbor's backyard. The threat from Kevin and Marcus Thorne was still out there. I had protected the future, but I didn't yet know what they were planning for the present. I went back to my safe house, the corner computer at the next county's library. This time, my search had a sharper aim. I wasn't just chasing Thorne's past anymore. I was hunting for the overlap between his world and Kevin's. I started by tracing Thorne's shell companies and cross-referencing them with any newly registered businesses under Kevin's name. For hours, nothing. They were careful, 2 ships moving in parallel through the night, leaving no shared wake. Then I changed tactics. Instead of searching names, I searched addresses. I took the virtual mailbox address Thorne's companies used and looked up other entities registered there. That's when I found it. A name repeating through the filings, a name that sounded familiar and wholesome. The Oakhaven Future Fund. My pulse picked up. I'd seen that name somewhere on a flyer at the grocery store, a little item in the local paper. It was a benevolent name, a name you could trust. I typed it into Google. The website popped right up. It looked professional. The palette was green and blue, the colors of hope and trust. Smiling photos of kids playing in the park, seniors doing yoga, the stated mission, raise money to build a new community center for our town of Oakhaven, daycare, a gym, art classes, a perfect charitable facade. I scrolled. Under our team were photos of local leaders I'd known my whole life. The mayor, the Chamber of Commerce chair. And then I saw him, Kevin Riley. His title, Director of Fundraising. A role tailor-made for a bright smile and hollow promises. The headshot was well lit. He looked trustworthy, dedicated. I felt a small wave of nausea. He hadn't just infiltrated my family. He was infiltrating my community. With an auditor's instincts, I trusted numbers and filings over glossy pictures. I pulled up GuideStar, the national database for nonprofits, and searched Oakhaven Future Fund. No results. Strange. An effort this big should be registered. I tried again, checked the spelling. Still nothing. A thin unease threaded through me. I went to the state business registry. This time, I searched for Oakhaven Future Fund. There it was. Not as a standard 501c3 nonprofit, but as an LLC, a for-profit limited liability company. There it was, the hairline crack in the paperwork. The kind of detail most people would miss. Folks were donating, assuming tax deductibility, assuming a nonprofit was stewarding the money. In reality, they were handing cash to a private company. A company whose registered agent buried behind 2 layers of other shells was Marcus Thorne, the normalization of evil. The con wasn't hiding in shadow. It was hiding in daylight. wrapped in a pious, admirable veneer so shiny no one bothered to look underneath. I returned to the fund site. A countdown clock ticked at the top. The campaign's grand finale would be a charity auction and gala in 2 weeks at the Oak Haven Country Club. The social event of the year, everyone in their finest, champagne flutes in hand, proud signatures on big checks. That would be their stage, the place they'd harvest a town's trust. I shut down the computer. I didn't feel anger anymore. Anger is a hot emotion. What I felt was cold as ice. A weight of responsibility settled on me. I was the only one who knew. My earlier silence had, indirectly, let this danger take root in my family. I could not allow it to spread and poison my community. I drove home past familiar houses. I saw Bill Peterson watering his lawn. I saw Mrs. Gable collecting her mail. Good people who'd worked hard all their lives. People who believed in their town. People about to be fooled. I looked at my house, the one Carolyn and I built. It wasn't just walls and a roof. It was a piece of Oak Haven. And I would not stand by and watch a social parasite hollow it out from within. This fight was no longer mine alone. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking, like, or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you? And where are you listening? I hate galas. I hate tight tuxedos, polished dress shoes, biting our heels, the hollow laughter bouncing off 2 big rooms. But that night, I put on my best tux. I shined my shoes until I could see my tired face in them. Because tonight, I wasn't Jack Caldwell, retired auditor. I was an actor. And this was my stage, the Oak Haven Country Club glitter under chandeliers. All the important people in town were there. Kevin, of course, was the star of the evening, stationed by the entrance, shaking hands, his smile a lighthouse beam. He was in full performance. Sarah stood next to him, radiant in an emerald gown. She looked beautiful, but I could see the tension in the way she gripped her tiny clutch, knuckles white. She was holding the perfect wall together. I moved in. "Sarah, sweetie," I said, kissing her cheek. "You look wonderful." Then I turned to Kevin. "Congratulations, Kevin. This is a great event." I shook his hand and even clapped him on the shoulder with what felt like fatherly pride. His return embrace was hollow, a show for the other guests, who watched us with warm smiles. To them, we looked like a united family. To me, it was a 3-act play. I didn't linger. I took a glass of champagne and began to circulate. Kevin was not my target. He was too self-satisfied to notice anything. My target was Eleanor Davenport. Eleanor was Oak Haven's unelected queen, the widow of a local industrialist. She underwrote everything from the library to the high school football team. Her blessing made reputations. Her suspicion could destroy them. She stood by a window, watching the room like a general surveying a battlefield. I waited until she was alone. "Eleanor," I said, sidling up to her. "What a lovely evening. Nessus Dazer." "Jack," she smiled, that genuine smile of hers. "So nice to see you here. Carolyn would be proud." That was my opening. "You know, she truly would," I said, my tone softer. "She loved this community. That's why I made a rather sizable donation to the fund." "Oh, Jack, how wonderful," Eleanor said. I looked out the window as if lost in thought. "One small thing, maybe it's just me being old and overly cautious. Eleanor, I'm a man who works with old numbers, but I happened to glance at the fund's registration. Is it normal for it to be registered as an LLC? Carolyn used to say you always check the fine print. I'd planted a seed. I didn't accuse. I offered the concern of an old man, invoking my late wife's name, a name Eleanor respected. I saw a flicker shift in Eleanor's eyes. She was sharp. "An LLC?" she repeated, brow knitting. I hadn't noticed. Kevin said his attorney handled all the paperwork. "Oh, is it Rexamon?" "Oh, I'm sure everything is fine," I said quickly, brushing it off. "Just the curiosity of the trade. Anyway, lovely to see you, Eleanor." I walked away without looking back. The seed had been set in the most fertile soil. For the rest of the night, I moved like a ghost edging along walls, listening, watching. The auction began. Luxury items went up. A Napa Getaway, a Rolex, a painting by a local artist. Hands shot up, money flowed. But I didn't watch the lots. I watched the process. I noticed something odd. When winners paid with credit cards, they didn't go to a formal cashier. They approached a few young volunteers holding mobile card readers attached to their phones. It looked makeshift too informal for an event of this scale. Then I heard it. An older gentleman complained he didn't want to give his card info to an unsecured device. Kevin moved in smoothly, reassuring. "No problem, sir," he said. "All syrup." For convenience, large donations can be wired directly. Here, he drew a small business card from his pocket and handed it to the man. All the account information is on there. I waited until Kevin moved away. I stepped up to the guest. "Excuse me," I said. "Could I see that card? I'd like to wire a donation as well." He handed over. I glanced. It wasn't Bank of America or Wells Fargo, no local bank I recognized. It was the name of some little-known online bank headquartered in a distant state. There it was, the weakness, the money line. I returned the card and thanked the guest. I knew I had enough for tonight. I slipped out of the gala unnoticed. Driving home through the hush of midnight, I felt a deep disgust at having to take part in that performance. But under it sat a cool confidence. I had a potential ally. I had a point of attack. The piece had been set on the social chessboard, and I knew exactly what my next move would be. I didn't go home right after the gala. I drove to a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, ordered a black coffee, and sat in a cracked booth. Under the jaundiced fluorescent light, I took out my phone. I needed a different kind of specialist, someone from the modern world I only half understood. I needed my cavalry. I looked up Ben Carter in my contacts. Ben was the son of an old friend. I'd mentored him when he first graduated, taught him the basics of auditing. Now he was a top cybersecurity pro in Philadelphia, a digital wizard who could track ghosts inside machines. I called. It was nearly midnight, but I knew he'd pick up. "Uncle Jack?" Ben's voice was sleepy but alert in an instant. "What's up?" "Ben," I said, "urgent. I need your help with something. Family matter, totally confidential." A short pause. "I understand," he said, instantly professional. "What do you need?" "I need you to look at a few transactions, trace a money flow, and no fight." I sent him the photos I'd taken at the party, the mobile payment processor's name, the bank account info from the business card, the name of the fund. "Find out where the money actually goes," I said, "and spot anything odd." "I'll dig in," Ben said. "I'll get back to you tomorrow morning." I went home and tried to sleep, but my mind was racing. I had planted seeds of doubt. I had found a weak point, but I didn't yet have hard proof. I needed a smoking gun. Ben called at 9 the next morning, earlier than I expected. That wasn't a good sign. "Jack," he said without hello, "are you sitting down? Tell me." "The money flows exactly as you suspected. Charges and transfers go into that online bank account. From there, it moved through 2 additional shell LLCs before landing in an account held by Silverline Global, Marcus Thorne's company," I said, a cold confirmation settling my chest. "Right," Ben said. "But that's not the worst part. It isn't even the closest." He drew a breath. "While I was looking at the Old Haven Future Fund activity, I found something else, a government loan application filed last week." I was silent, waiting. "Worse, Jack. Kevin used the fund's list of reputable donors' names like Eleanor Davenport, the mayor, people who'd pledged support as evidence of projected revenue and community backing. He used those names to apply for a $250,000 EIDL, an economic injury disaster loan, from the Small Business Administration. The air left my lungs. EIDLs are meant to help small businesses hurt by disasters like the COVID pandemic. He falsely claimed the fund was a small business with 15 employees that needed payroll support. Ben continued, his disgust barely restrained. He used the community's credibility to defraud the federal government. This isn't charity fraud anymore, Jack. It's wire fraud. It's false statements to a federal agency. That's a federal crime. People go to prison for years over things like this. I sat motionless in my armchair, the phone to my ear. This was it. A smoking gun. Kevin, in his greed and stupidity, hadn't just ripped off friends and neighbors. He'd stuck a gun in the government face and he left a paper trail that couldn't be erased. Ben, I said, my voice unnaturally calm, send everything you've got in the encrypted email. All applications, all transfer confirmations, everything. Of course, Uncle Jack, he said. But what are you going to do? This is bigger than you realize. You know, I said. Thanks, Ben. I owe you one. I hung up. The anxiety that had gnawed at me for days dissolved. In its place came a cold, deadly calm. I'd passed the emotional threshold. From now on, it was strategy and execution. Ben's email arrived minutes later, password protected. I opened it. There it all was. The loan application with Kevin's e-signature, the Bill's donor list, the Shell company trail. I spent the afternoon in my study. I stopped analyzing and started preparing. I dug out my old printer and began to print page after page. I printed the loan application. I printed Ben's money flow diagram. I printed Marcus Thorne's criminal file. I printed news accounts about Thorne's past victims. The printer whirred and clacked in the quiet house like the ticking of a time bomb. When it was done, a thick stack sat on my desk. I grabbed a 3-ring black binder and carefully hole-punched every page. I ordered them chronologically, adding tabs, past cons, Oak Haven Future Fund, federal fraud. When I finished, it was no longer a pile of paper. It was an indictment. A professional, meticulously assembled dossier on my son-in-law's crimes. I was no longer building a case. I was holding a sentence. The fight had moved beyond exposure. It was about choosing when and how to squeeze the trigger. A predator backed into a corner doesn't act like a rational creature. It acts on instinct. It attacks the easiest target it can see. And in Kevin's world, I was the easy target. I knew he was desperate. The pressure from Marcus Thorne had to be building. The gala takings weren't enough. He needed a big score, fast, to buy his way out. I decided to give him an exit, an illusion of an exit. I started by setting the stage. Tuesday afternoon, I spent 2 hours tidying my study. I put away stacks of papers I didn't need, leaving only what was essential. Then I knelt in front of the old steel safe that had sat in the corner for a decade. I spun the dial and listened to those familiar clicks. The heavy door groaned open. There wasn't much inside. A few old deeds, Sarah's birth certificate, the little blue velvet box that held the pearl set I'd given Carolyn on our 25th anniversary. I took everything out, leaving the interior a hollow, dusted cavity. Next came the bait. Around 5, I called Sarah. I knew this was the time Kevin usually came home. I knew he had a habit of eavesdropping on his wife's calls, not out of concern, but to gather intelligence. I used a slightly anxious, slightly muddled tone, the voice of a doddering old man facing complicated troubles. Sarah, darling, I began. I was talking with David Sterling today about getting a few things in order for the future. Yes? Is something wrong? Her voice tightened. No, nothing like that. Just complicated. He suggested I keep some assets off the books to avoid estate hassles. Said it'd be wise to keep a fair amount of cash someplace safe. I sighed theatrically. So I'll have to go to the bank tomorrow and withdraw a large sum. It's a nuisance, keeping that much cash at the house. I wasn't lying. I was telling a half-truth tailored for a pair of listening ears. The next day, I reinforced the lure. I drove to the bank. I didn't withdraw a cent. I spoke with the branch manager for 15 minutes. When I left, I carried an old leather briefcase one I had filled with outdated phone books to give it weight. I drove home. As I expected, Kevin's dark green Porsche cruised by in the opposite direction. He usually drove past my place at this hour on his way to some important meeting. He saw me. He saw the briefcase. He watched me carry it into the house carefully. The fish had seen the bait. Now it was time to place the heart of the trap. I went back to my study. I didn't put the phone books in the safe. I placed the thick dossier I'd prepared instead. I slapped a new label on the cover, designed to trigger curiosity and appetite. Oak Haven, Future Fund, Internal Audit Files, and Private Investor Roster. It was both threat and promise. I set the file right in the center of the empty safe. It sat there like a black island in a sea of gray steel. Finally, I armed the trap. I took the small security camera I'd bought online, the kind that looks like a wooden bookend. I put it on the shelf opposite the safe. The tiny lens gave a perfect view of the interior. I linked it to an app on my phone, and the last delicate insult. I took the safe's spare key, an old brass thing, and slid it into the top left drawer of my desk under a few paper clips. That was Carolyn's drawer. It was the first place a lazy thief would look. I shut the drawer, walked to the safe, and pushed the heavy steel door closed. It clicked with a deep, decisive snap. The sound echoed through the quiet house. It wasn't the noise of a door being shut, it was the sound of a cage falling. I no longer felt anger or anxiety. I felt a cold, faded calm. I had done everything I could. I had built the stage, written the script, and placed the props in their exact spots. The rest would depend on one man's greed. And greed is the one thing in this world I still trust completely. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you? And where are you listening? I didn't have to wait long. At 2:17 a.m. on Friday, my phone buzzed on the nightstand, a notification from the security app, motion detected office. I was ready. On the phone screen, in the weak infrared glow, I watched the final act play out. Kevin slipped in like a petty thief, went straight to my desk, opened the drawer, and took out the spare key. He knelt before the safe. Through the little screen, I could feel his eagerness. The steel door creaked open. He froze. He shone his phone's flashlight inside. The expression on his face shifted from excitement to pure, absolute confusion. He didn't find cash. He found the dossier. I watched him tremble as he lifted it and read the label on the cover. And then I watched him fall apart. His face drained of color, the pink of greed gone white with horror. He rifled the pages frantically, and I knew exactly what he was seeing. His life of lies cataloged, indexed, and laid out for display. That was when I stepped in. I'd been standing in the dark hallway, phone in hand, recording from another angle. I padded into the office. My slippers made no sound. "Find what you were looking for, Kevin?" I asked. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut the silence like a shard of glass. He let out a strangled scream and fell backward, knocking the dossier from his hands. Papers scattered across the floor like a blizzard of white. He looked at me, eyes wide in the dark, mouth open. He tried to lie, the reflex of a man who lived by lies his whole life. "Dad, Jack," I heard a noise. I thought there was a burglar. "Don't," I said, and that single word smothered his lie. "Don't insult my intelligence anymore." He saw the phone in my hand. He saw the tiny red recording light blinking. He realized he was being filmed. For a moment, his fear turned into the rage of an animal trapped in a corner. "You old fool," he snarled, lunging at me. "You think you can destroy me?" I didn't step back. "Before you do anything stupid," I said, calm, "know this. Dad's lawyer already has a digital copy of that file. And Mrs. Davenport is very curious about this fund's audit results. That double strike, legal and social, knocked him off balance." His fury deflated into hollow desperation. "But you know, Kevin," I continued, "this was never really about you. Our vent, ever." I switched the phone from the camera app to my contacts and dialed video for Sarah. After 3 rings, her still sleepy face appeared. "Dad? What is it? It's late." "I'm sorry to wake you, sweetheart," I said, voice soft with love and pain. "But there's something Kevin needs to explain to both of us." I pointed the phone camera at the scene in front of me. Through the tiny screen, she saw what I saw. Her husband standing amid the strewn papers, the open safe behind him yawning like a mouth. I didn't have to say a word. The image told the whole story. There was a strangled sob over the line, and then a silence that shattered. I ended the call and looked at Kevin. He was a hollow man. "You have 2 choices," I said, voice cold and final. "Option 1, you disappear. Right now. You leave my daughter's life and never come back. In return, I will share only a sliver of information with Mrs. Davenport. Your reputation in this town will be ruined, but you will be free. Option 2, you stay. And at 9 a.m., this entire file goes to the FBI office in Philadelphia." He didn't hesitate. A coward always takes the easy way out. He nodded without meeting my eyes. He rose, passed me like a ghost, and walked out the front door. I heard the Porsche roar once, then fade into the night. I stood in my office a while longer, looking at the papers on the floor. Victory wasn't sweet the way I'd imagined. It was only empty and exhausting. At dawn, I heard a familiar car pull up. Sarah? She came inside with a pale, swollen face from crying. She didn't speak. Neither did I. There was nothing left to say. Everything had already been said in that video call silence. I made 2 cups of coffee. We sat on the back porch where Caroline and I had sat 1,000 times. We watched the sun come up, staining the sky pink and orange. Finally, I broke the silence. I did not speak of Kevin. I did not speak of money. I pointed at the house. This home was built on honesty, sweetheart, I said quietly. Every brick and board. It was built with long days' work and nights of easy sleep. I turned to her. For the first time in years, she really looked at me. It will always be a safe place for you, I said. Always. And it was and tears ran down her cheeks. But these were not the tears of collapse. They were tears of release. She nodded a little and laid her hand over mine. The road ahead would be long and hard. But for the first time in a long time, I knew we would walk it together. Our house had stood. Its honor had been restored.